And we're going to have introductions regarding the Interfaith panel, and I first of all would like to introduce to you, many of you probably already know Ann Corriston, who is the Executive Director at Interfaith Ministries, just down the street, and I have gotten a chance to know Ann, and I said, Ann, I would love to have an interfaith panel. I think that you probably are the perfect person to help me put it together. And so I'm going to have Ann introduce the panel and also share a little bit about interfaith ministry and its purpose tonight.
Thank you, Brent. It is a joy to be here. Interfaith Ministries, as you know or may not know, is a couple of blocks up the street. We're at the intersection of Market and Murdoch. We are 128 years old. We actually are older than many of the churches and congregations in this community. We were founded by a group of Protestant ministers who were trying to solve a very critical social problem of the day. Do you know what that was? Dancers were performing on Sunday nights. It was very troubling to them. It was a social problem of the day, and the message that I have for you is keep your mission current, because we are no longer tackling that problem. But we are working on homelessness and housing and nutrition, food issues for people in primarily Wichita. We are a very local agency. We welcome people of all faiths to join us in this work. We operate a shelter that is just a stone's throw to the east from here. It's called the Interfaith Inn at 320 East Central. It's open year-round. It serves homeless people, provides a place for them to sleep, to get meals, and to get some really serious coaching from our staff on what are you going to do to move forward and not be homeless. How can we help you? And if they have severe problems, severe and lengthy homelessness and chronic homelessness and mental illness, then we put them in the Interfaith T. Wachoni Safe Haven shelter at 841 North Broadway. And we're gearing up for a special shelter that's going to open, as it has since 1990, on November 1st, the Warming Souls Winter Shelter. There's one location for homeless men and a separate location for homeless women. My words of advice to you are do not combine the two. Do not put homeless women and homeless men in a winter seasonal shelter in the same location. There just ends up being a lot of drama it doesn't help us solve problems. So that will be starting up in less than 2 months. So we welcome your ideas, your support, your participation. And I also want to thank First Presbyterian Church, because you've been the home of a wonderful fun fundraiser that we do every end of January, early February, called the SOUPER Super Bowl, which is to call attention to the issues of hunger during a weekend when we're all thinking about the big game and food and parties and snacks and liquid beverages. The purpose of this event is to call attention to the fact that there are still hungry people walking and living among us. So we have restaurant chefs prepare wonderful soup. It's a fun event, and this church has been so gracious in letting us use their fabulous space and conducting this event, which has raised several thousand, probably $100,000 for us over the last several years. So I don't want to say anything more about Interfaith Ministries except to say it is a joy to introduce each of these panelists. And I'll start at the far end. Pastor Dave Fulton is the pastor at St. Paul Lutheran Church. And remember what I told you about our men's winter shelter? That little building at 8th and Market was the first home of St. Paul's Lutheran Church. They're now at 9th and Waco, but we share that little interesting piece of history with his church. Reverend Dr. Don Olsen is the pastor at Plymouth Congregational Church, located at First and Clifton. He's been in Wichita about, 5, 6 years? Okay, 8. Oops. And he is also on the board of Interfaith Ministries. It has been my joy to work with him because he was the board president when I was first hired, and I have a great deal of respect for his intellect, but also his kindness. We have our featured speaker here, Dr. Wellman, sitting in the center. And then to his right is Rabbi Lorraine Madway. And she wanted to make sure that I explained to you she does not have a congregation. She's trained as a rabbi. And that's pretty special. She is among an elite group of people in Kansas who are female rabbis. Are you the only one? Maybe she is the only one. She's also, I think, on the board of the Mid-Kansas Jewish Federation. Yes, that's how I've come to know her. So she graciously and willingly accepted the invitation to be here tonight.
Earned my livelihood as the curator of special collections and the university archivist at Wichita State University Library. And like you, I am an academic. My PhD is in history, so that I'm coming from several.
She studies a lot. I think that's what she's trying to tell us.
I was a scholar in search of a patron, and she's tired of being my patron. So thank you, Wichita State University.
Can you say that again?
Just the last part. I'm just because my background is very different from the esteemed gentleman that we're meeting here. I've had a lot of academic training as well as rabbinic training, and I am very grateful to both. Right now, I'm the curator of special collections and the university archivist at Wichita State University Libraries. I've taught in the history department as well, and so I'm a scholar. I try to be, and just to give my mother credit, she would describe me on more than one occasion as a scholar in search of a patron, and she was tired of being my patron. So I am truly grateful that I am an associate professor now at the university. And you know what that means. It means I have tenure. But tenure is it just means, from the library's perspective, an opportunity to contribute more. And that's really a good thing. But I'm just very, very honored to be here amongst this group and this panel. So thank you very much.
And our final panelist represents the Islamic Society of Wichita. And Interfaith Ministries has had a nice partnership with that organization. And our panelist is Ahmed Haroual.
Haroual, that's right.
Okay. I practiced it 10 times inside my head. So with that, I guess we'll get started. And how do we get started?
What we would like to do is for the panelists to, after hearing Dr. Wellman's presentation, I'm sure you probably had some questions you might like to ask of him and give him a chance to have a dialogue, and we'll go one at a time, and it doesn't have to be in any order, just as basically as the Spirit leads you. So I guess I will open it up to any one of you. If you do have a question,
I'll start from here.
The microphone and speak in the microphone, okay? There's one right in front of you.
Can I start? Yeah, go ahead. Well, thank you very much, and okay. It's a pleasure that I'm here. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And my name is Ahmed Haroual, born and raised in Morocco. Came to the U.S. in 1995 as a student. I'm no scholar in religion. I just simple representative of the Islamic Society of Wichita, and my background is in economics. And after that, I came to Wichita, and there's only aviation. So I studied aviation, and I work in the aviation field. But I'll try my best to answer the question if I know. If I don't, I don't. I have a thought when Doctor was explaining his views, and I think personally that ideology and religion is a form of ideology as well. Any ideology can be a source of violence, and we've seen that with the Nazis, the Communist Party, and so many in histories. So any ideology, the person can be fervent to their religion, zealous about their ideology, for it to prevail, and that's why they can resort to violence sometimes. And I don't know if Doctor can have.
Yeah, no, can you hear me? Yeah, I totally agree. What I would say is that those ideologies of the 20th century were kind of political religions. and you know, it really developed this passion for a kind of apocalyptic vision of what the world could be, and obviously led by you know, men that were extremists, and came into a time when people were incredibly uncertain, and gave a vision to nations and to groups that anything was possible, and the source of reward. So yeah, no, I would. There's similarities between them, and I think you could make those kind of arguments as well. You know, I was going to say this in the speech, and I want to just say it out loud right now, and that is one of the key figures that I read to understand the Arab world, the Middle East, and to understand the Muslim world is a guy named Juan Cole, Juancole. And he wrote a book called Engage the Muslim World. And he's both a sociologist and a historian and a very good understanding of the Middle East. And one of the things he says, and I think this is really important to understand, is that most Muslims hate the extremists in their midst. And I think that's just really critical for us to, you know, in the United States to understand. But what he does say, and I think this is something very important, is that Muslims also want democracy and freedom and Sharia. That is, they don't see any contradictions, whereas I think most Americans do see contradictions between those items. And you know, so his understanding and my observations of the Muslim world, that rings true. But you know, still you have these extremists who capture people's attention and do terrible things. And yeah, go ahead.
Adding to that, I just came from Morocco about 3 weeks ago, and I stayed there for a couple of months. And there was, and I don't know why people just ask me this question, because I look like, I don't know, a religious terrorist, I don't know. But they ask me this question all the time, like, Ahmed, please explain to us why these ISIS are doing this. And they're just normal Muslim people all over Morocco. They're asking this question. So themselves, they don't know how come that our religion can teach something like that. So that's adding to what the doctor has said. It just, the majority of people, they just want some equality, some freedom, some democracy, and some justice, because they've been abused for a century. When you have poverty, ignorance, and desperation in some people, of course, somebody like Osama bin Laden can lead them to violence. But you know, any person who knows just a little bit about Islam can have an argument with any terrorist, because in the teaching of Islam, there was not such a thing in the history of the Prophet Muhammad. Never said to people, go and kill or bomb yourself or blow yourself and kill yourself and kill others. In fact, he would ask people, when you go to war, you only fight in the battlefield. You never touch a woman, kill a woman, a child, a grown-up man. Don't even cut a tree. If you don't have a tree, don't cut a tree. And it only stays in the battlefield. So anybody who knows just a little bit about our history can argue with this, you know, this terrorist, you know, and extremists, which can come and flourish in every religion, as the doctor has presented.
Thank you. Lorraine, thoughts? Or Dave, are you prepared to say something?
Oh, you there? Yeah, there we go. In 2006, I was in Mosul, Iraq, which is the biblical Nineveh. And we took a trip downtown to the Women's Center, where Annan, whose brothers were both killed in acts of terrorism in Baghdad, went to the safe place called Mosul, which of course now is right in the center of the ISIS revolutionaries. But there's a little girl there who said, all we children of Iraq want is to be able to go to the park and play and not be shot by a sniper or blown up by a bomb. And my thought was that women in Iraq were making a difference. At that time, the men were out being terrorists and doing whatever men do, but the women were making a difference. And I was very hopeful at that time. So I guess, and what happened in Mosul is when America went in there, General Petraeus was the general in charge, and he had his chaplains speaking with the leaders, the religious leaders in Mosul, and they were having conversations, and the thought came that in Iraq and in Islam is the culture. It's not like you have religion and something else. It is the culture. So in order to have a constructive conversation, you had to have religious leaders who understood the language of religion and the deep impulses of religion. And so I guess my question is there hope in a country where state, church and state, religion and politics are separate, of a conversation where a culture, where they're deeply intermeshed with each other?
You mean where state and religion are one?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think I've kind of made my point of view pretty clear. I think states, when they have religion on their side, I think have a tendency to become violent, and religion is used for that. And so I have to be honest. I am suspicious of state religion. And, that's in part why I'm suspicious of the U.S. calling itself a Christian nation. Not only does that hurt Christianity, but it hurts the United States and gives it way too much a sense of that it can be the Messiah for the world. So I think it's always a problem. I think we should be critical of that. I'm not critical just of Islam, but also the United States. You look at U.S. foreign policy in the 20th century. It is increasingly true that religion is at the center of too many of our foreign policy decisions, I think. And so anyway, but I was going to say also, one of the interesting findings in the Religion and Human Security book, we did a really intensive study of Pakistan. One of the interesting findings is that Pakistanis on the ground in the villages couldn't distinguish who was the terrorist and who was not, because the information wasn't out there. So they didn't know who was on their side, who wasn't. And so, I think there's a lot of, sort of who do we follow? What do we do? And I think ISIS is probably, has created that situation. Maybe they're strong enough. Maybe we should get on their side. Who knows? They're probably, there's incredible ignorance on the ground, and people get caught up in things they don't even know what they're doing. So it's a tragic situation, and it's terrible. I feel terrible for the people. Pakistanis, in general, hated the violence that was occurring, but they didn't know who was doing it. And that's what we found through these intensive surveys that they had done. So it was a very difficult situation. So,
Okay. Do we have another panelist who would like to? Lorraine?
When you were talking, you were putting a lot of emphasis on leadership. That certainly resonates. But I'm going to go back to a core Jewish teaching. You mentioned it when you were connecting Christianity and Islam, but really it comes from Judaism, that God loves everyone. Judaism is the source, and we are fortunate that other traditions have embraced it. Part of love, though, part of God's love for us is to expect us, each of us as individuals, as well as communities, to be responsible when we have free will, to exercise it in a responsible way. And what I'm wondering, with your emphasis on leadership, what about followers? What responsibilities do followers have to make decisions that do promote the best teachings of their respective faith? Shouldn't that be front and center as much as the emphasis on leadership?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a great point about Judaism. I think Judaism is the source of implied source of both for Christianity and Islam. So I agree with you. I was being critical. I guess what I was saying is that beware of bad leadership and then take it down. Maybe I shouldn't say that. Well, take it down in the sense of walk away from it. Walk away from it. We have a case of bad leadership in the Seattle area in a megachurch. A guy named Mark Driscoll that you might have heard of. Just a history of bullying, and people put up with it. And it's incredible what people put up with. So I think, yes, goodness, I would say followers, yes, get involved. Don't let your priests or your rabbis or your imams take advantage of you. I think that's what's going on. So I guess, is that...
It does.
Yeah.
You certainly provide one very powerful response.
Yeah.
The problem for people, because followers don't have the same power as clever, charismatic, organized leaders, whatever the tradition, when followers don't always respond to take down leaders when they're just starting out.
Yep.
Hitler, frankly, for German people, was politically religious. He was charismatic, he was messianic.
Yep.
When people either ignore or disregard or ultimately are afraid to do something, this is where followers have to find within themselves strength to respond so they can take the good that is in every tradition. And sometimes, because in much of my life I have to be a follower, finding a way, because all of our traditions have not only physical resistance, but spiritual resistance, that sometimes is the powerful source of strength that we have, that is something that really connects us. And that's something, right now, as we're facing these terrors throughout the world, one question is, would spiritual resistance help to give us, each of us, and then as communities of goodwill, power for greater resistance? I don't know. But.
Yeah, no, I love that comment. For me, my hero has always been Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And why is that? He was a German Lutheran pastor, could have escaped Germany with the rise of Nazism, and did escape to New York, but intentionally went back to resist, knew that he was putting himself in absolute danger, and literally went against his own ethical tradition and became a part of a conspiracy to try to assassinate Hitler. And, and died at 39, 15 days before the Allied liberated that camp. I think absolutely we need those heroes to take those make those very difficult decisions and at the risk of their lives. And I think we don't talk about them enough. We talk about sports figures all the time, ad nauseum, for goodness sake. But we don't talk about these heroes. And, I think we should much more often. I love what you're saying. So, yes, amen. Yeah, maybe so. Yeah, for sure. There's a great book on the silent followers in Germany. There's a great book called Hitler's Willing Executioners. And, that's important to point out. When do followers fail? And, that's, and as Americans, we need to stand up against political terrorism. When politicians try to hold us on any side of the aisle, we should stand up to it. And I think there's crazy stuff going on right now. So anyway, we can talk about that.
Don, you look ready. You've grabbed a microphone. Oh.
talk bring history and leadership followers into that conversation. What is the attack on public education all about?
Yeah, no, I think we're speaking the same language, and that, you know, all Americans should have a public education that's worthy of what we've always thought of as the American way to educate our citizens. And a part of that is educating citizens to be active partners in democracy. Right? Anyway, so I'll start preaching.
Dr. Olsen, you ready?
It's a good segue into an area of this that really interests me, and it is the responsibility of the follower. Most of us up here put ourselves in the category of leadership in some way or another, and I'm curious about you as our attendees, as the audience. How much leadership do you take in your own congregation or faith tradition in leading your faith group to interfaith relationships? How many of you have said to your pastor, imam, rabbi, let's invite the Presbyterian church over. Let's invite the Islamic society over. Let's get to know our neighbors. It seems to me the core of our tradition is to love God and love our neighbor. And if we don't know who our neighbor is, how in the heck are we going to love them? I'm curious, how many Protestants are here? And how many Catholics are here?
They were all at the event that I attended earlier today. There were 1,000 of us at that event.
The golf tournament, was that? I'm kidding, I'm just kidding.
Wine drinking. No, I'm kidding.
I'm kidding.
Kidding. No.
And
it was-
how many of the Islamic faith are here?
Yeah, it's a good turnout.
It's a very good turnout. And how many of the Jewish faith are here?
Good turnout.
Wonderful. Now, you have all just self-identified yourself as leaders in what we're talking about here. And when we run into people in the airport like Ahmed, if we know him, we know he's not a terrorist. And if we know him, he knows that we love him. But we can't just gather on Sunday morning and not also gather somewhere on Saturday, like at a synagogue or a temple, or maybe even the Seventh-day Adventists, or maybe even the Mormons. If we believe that God loves all children, all human beings as God's children, then we need to get to know all of God's children.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Okay.
I think the rabbi had a...
Let me, go ahead.
Our former minister, former leader of the Islamic Society, some 10 years ago had a discussion, and it's been about 10 years ago you invited a group from our church to the mosque, and you fed us dinner, and we had a discussion, and many of us remember that evening, and we want to remember that in response to Reverend Olsen.
If I can say one more thing before you your question. So much of our life is run by fact. We live in such a physical world. We can, if we choose to, communicate so easily. I have to turn my cell phone off all the time because I don't want to be communicated with while I'm trying to communicate with you. But what we're talking about here today is not physical. What we're talking about here today is metaphysical. It's above, beyond what we see and feel here. The experience of God in each of your own traditions, and I'll speak as a mainline Protestant, a member of the Frozen Chosen group, those who have difficulty reacting or acting up as they should in issues like education and women's issues, and on that list could go. We sit and nod our head rather than getting out and vote, rather than taking the step to meet our neighbor. What we deal with in the metaphysical realm of each of our traditions is best summed up in the burning bush, I think. We're playing with fire. And fire makes good people better, and it makes bad people worse. The thugs, the terrorists that are using religion are using the spiritual fire of the metaphysical world to do things in the physical world so that they can gain more of it. In 1989, I was at a seminar, a gathering of interfaith clergy and laity in Washington, D.C. It was a 3-day event, and at the conclusion of that event, the best comment, the remaining comment from those 3 days was that I, as a Christian, cannot deal effectively with terrorists of another faith. But I can deal with terrorists of the Christian faith, and we know we have them. Even right here in Kansas, we've had them. You, as a Muslim, cannot deal with Christian terrorists, but you can deal with Islamic terrorists. And the same in Judaism. We need to take responsibility. You've all identified yourselves as leaders. We need, as leaders in our faith, to take responsibility for the extremists of our faith, to preach against them, to teach against them, to lead them, to discredit them. Thanks. That's all I wanted to say.
We've hit global violence in its religious dimension from one aspect tonight, but there's another aspect that we've just totally kind of left out, and I kind of want to bring it up because it's very much part of the equation. It isn't those who are the religious charismatic leaders who are willing to use violence to accomplish their political aims. It's also political leaders who are willing to use religious language to accomplish the aims of the state. Completely different. Think about Rome, and think about the cult around Rome. Think about the United States, and think about when's the last time we ever heard every president's always evoked the name of God. So I'd like Dr. Wellman and the panelists to also talk about the function and nature of the empire to use religious language.
You know, you're actually not right.
Good.
It's interesting. There's actually, my colleague, David Donkey, has done studies on this. And how many, specifically on which president used God language the most. And how did it change over time. And one of the fascinating things is that Ronald Reagan, sorry, but it's just, empirically true, is that Reagan quintupled the use of God language. And from that point on, recent leaders have followed suit. And so, whatever you think of Ronald Reagan, I don't know. Something's happened. So it's not like it's always been the case. In fact, Eisenhower and others before, JFK, and then Johnson, others, Nixon even, did not use God language nearly as much. And so something happened, and it's a great point, though. And then, and the God language was used to rationalize a series of wars that we've seen over the last 20, 30 years. And I'm not sure about you, but I don't know if there have been good wars. But often it's been the case, that, our recent president basically said this is a crusade. He took it back, but right? Yes? In the White House, he said crusade. So he took it back, but once you say crusade, I don't know about you, but that's frightening. Anyway, sorry.
I think that one of the worst things that we can do as Americans is to actually help those extremist groups by taking their cause and then generalizing it. Okay? So you take it, and we can help by isolating them. Because when you start to take it and say, this is a problem of the entire religion, you have those people who are sitting somewhere in a corner and say, what did I do to you? I didn't do nothing to you. Why are you picking a fight with me? I equate it to somebody coming from another neighborhood to my neighborhood, vandalizing my car, and then go to the other neighborhood and I say, he came from your side, now I'm going to fight with all of you. That's not smart, is it? And I think that sometimes that's what has happened, especially after 9/11, is you have specific religious leaders in this society who took it as an opportunity by by vilifying a certain religion, and you're not doing yourself any favor, because let's face it, I mean there are out of one of every 4 or 5 people on this planet is a Muslim. Do you want to pick a fight with 1.5 billion people? It doesn't serve us as humanity. So in addition to that dialogue, which even if you don't love your neighbor, at least you don't hate him. At least you understand him. At least you can actually come to some common sense and say, well, we don't have to be friends, but I don't hate you, you don't hate me. And, if there's something that's common between us and we can work on, let's work on it. And I think that's the danger that sometimes they see, because people like us who grew up in other places, who are emissaries, and we go and we see other people over there and they go, I didn't do nothing to these people, I actually like them. And sometimes you hear it in the news. For example, you take like Iran, and you go into and you do surveys inside Iran. In fact, Iranians love American, pop culture. And so that's the part where we have to get smart and realize that, there are certain groups that are causing problems. Sometimes there are sympathizers with them across the board. And you even have to understand why are people sympathizing sometimes with those groups. Because people sometimes mix up the issues in their heads. You start to mix this issue with that issue, and I have a problem with you because your cousin's cousin did something to my uncle 16 years ago, and and that's not very smart or sophisticated, but sometimes those are the realities I think we deal with. So I think that's the opportunity that I see, is we can help ourselves, help everybody around us, by saying, you know what, as we have in the law, you are innocent until presumed guilty. So you look like a terrorist, but until you blow up something, you're my friend.
Could I just say something, as I think I'm the lone Catholic in this room, is that right? Okay, so I attended a conference today, 1,000 people were there, and here are the 2 things that I came, 2 of many things. One is, beware of any leader who says, I have all the answers, I come from God, God has spoken directly to me, if you listen to me, I will tell you what to do. Be very, very wary of people like that, because true leaders do not point to themselves, they point to God. I really believe that. They point to God. It's not about me, it's about God. And we study what God has taught us through teachings of many faiths, but we point to God. Leaders point to God, true leaders. The second thing is, our families are the incubator for peace in this world. All of us have families. All of us have children in our lives, whether they are grandchildren, children, nieces, nephews. Cultivate that peace within your families. Teach your children, teach your grandchildren how to love, because that is the only way that we will move forward as a society, loving each other, loving our neighbor. You have to teach that as a parent. Little children do not come into this world violent. We may think when they're crying that that seems like violence, but they do not come into this world hating. They learn that. We all have the ability to influence children, so let's influence them to be peaceful.
We're opening up already to the congregation, to the audience, as you know. If we could have a question in mind and keep our comments short so other people who might have a question might have a chance to ask theirs of the group, and so let's do that.
I just have a number of observations. First of all, I completely agree with you. We have to love our neighbor. Even if you don't like the cat son of a gun, we still have to love him. But I somehow disagree with you that America is not a Christian country. Essentially, we are talking Western civilization is based on Judeo-Christian civilization. And essentially the battles that are being fought today is against Western civilization. We have to be aware of it, and we have to recognize, obviously, that the majority of Islam is not hostile to us, but it is a minority. The majority of the Germans were not Hitlerites, but they were insignificant. The majority of the Russians did not create the Gulag, but they did not do anything. They were insignificant. We have to recognize that our culture, essentially, that Western civilization has brought us to the best state that man can ever was. And we have to emphasize the importance of this civilization.
I think, I was going to say this will be controversial. Yeah, I agree. We're more or less a Christian country in the sense of that's our culture. I'm just saying, for instance, that the tradition, and it really started with Reagan, is you always end by saying God bless America, and so that there's the development of that history of American exceptionalism, and the idea that God exceptionally loves and blesses America. And so that's really what I'm kind of arguing with. And I think the president should stop saying that. He's not a religious figure, and he should stop being one, or he should say, may God bless the world. Yeah, you're right? Okay? And so this kind of hegemony in the name of God, I think is wrong and has led to bad consequences, I would say.
And our best president, Abraham Lincoln, when asked this question, was God on our side? He said, that's not the question. I hope we are on the side of God. Right. And he did not invoke that same kind of language.
And it strikes me as so interesting that those who trumpet constitutionality and the fathers of our nation often want to call us a Christian nation, but Washington, Jefferson, Adams were explicit, and even the first bill the Congress passed was a bill that said we are not a religious nation. We are Jews, we are Muslims, we are Christians, we are agnostics, and we call upon, and this is in our founding documents, we call upon the God of nature.
Let's people in the conversation.
I need to let others
Yeah, go ahead.
get a chance.
Okay, I confess I am a psychologist, and I do look at some of these issues from a psychological perspective. One of the things that a famous psychologist by the name of Alba Bandura studied was depersonalization, and that he went through a process that in order to, when you depersonalize somebody, it allows you to do terrible things to them. And in terms of the history of religion, this is part, and terrorism, there seems to be almost a packaging of this personalization. He mentioned knowing people, a lack of empathy. There was a book called The War Hotel, and the author talked about inventing a bogeyman, that this process takes place. And there have been many books written about the misuse of history in terms of configuring things, like in Serbia, where Dangerous Games, where she talks about how things were said that never took place. And so this allowed people to find people as the enemy. And so we don't have this greater understanding of other people. And that's what takes place because of possibly fear, economics, and all that. And then religion becomes the vehicle for this process to take place and allows us, because God is on our side, to kill somebody. And that is just absurd in terms of Western civilization and developing ourselves as being more than, we can be. So that's part of my...
One of the interesting things about post 9/11 is, for the first time, students became interested in the study of Islam. And, so if there's any benefit to that, it was the fact that people took Islam seriously as a religion, and before that, they didn't. Americans were ignorant. So I think that, you can depersonalize a religion as well.
Dr. Wellman, thanks for an interesting presentation.
Sure.
I have just a comment and a question. First, a comment. You mentioned the religious genie in us. Maybe that's part of our, innate fabric, that the way most religions really more or less believe in the 10 Commandments and what is wrong and what is right, and maybe that's part of our longing, to life and the life afterwards. The question really more to emphasize the importance of the followers. You mentioned that one of the problem with religious people in general is the concept of certainty, or the binary thinking. And maybe that we're emphasizing too much the faith part and less the critical thinking part. And maybe if we can improve on that, and reason will be less of a blind followers and more of thinkers, and less influenced by those leaders.
Yeah. And the role of the Enlightenment.
I'm not okay. The Enlightenment wasn't perfect, so let's not go overboard. The Enlightenment had terrorists as well. I think critical thought is really important. I don't scapegoat either way. Reason can get you into problems, and so can religion. So I think we just have to be critical of all of the ideologies that we are, in conversation with. I'm not an either-or guy. I think everything and everything has to be looked at critically. Too many Enlightenment thinkers or atheists now suddenly think they have all the wisdom. And I do not trust that. The new atheism, they're as fundamentalists as religious fundamentalists are, about being certain about how religion is the problem. That can lead to problems too. So, I'm just being...
So let me play the devil's advocate,
which is my job.
Let me play the devil's advocate.
Good.
Take Sam Harris Interfaith and his critique of religion and violence.
What? Have you read his stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good book. There's also I had students who did thorough research on his work. And he uses violent language at times to go after religious people. And that's a problem too. We should be critical of all these figures. It goes both ways. And I don't know.
Anyone over on this side of the...
Could it be said that one thing that organized religion has, and a charismatic leader in a specific religion has, is the ability to bring order out of chaos?
Yes, yeah, totally. I think that's why people go to church. They want some sense of peace. But you know, I think that's a good thing. I have no problem with that. Yeah. Yes.
Given our time constraints, what I'd like to do I'd like to give the panelists each an opportunity for one final comment, and then we'll have an opportunity for a book signing, and we can thank everyone for being here tonight. So let's just give now the microphones over to our panelists.
Just in listening to the conversation, I really think the key is for us to take our own religion seriously. In the depths of most world religions, there is a great harmony of spirit. But if a person doesn't take their religion seriously, if they leave it to someone else, that's when they become led astray, so to speak. So, you know, whatever your faith, whichever of all the great world religions, there is a mystical unity, a peace, a harmony, and it also goes over into astrophysics. So I'm actually very hopeful for religion, not for shallow religion, but for the real deal.
I've already talked too much.
Yeah, me too. But Micah said, you know, walk in humility, justice, and mercy. And, you know, that's a good one. Be modest about your mercy and your justice.
I am filled this evening with a spirit of the power of people to come together and the beauty of this place. And the two are related because people of goodwill can produce a lot. Followers can be the best leaders. We lead ourselves, we lead each other. And that is why I close not only by thanking all of you, but to say the words of Psalm 133. Hine ma tovu manaim shevet achim gam yachad. How good, how pleasant it is when brothers and sisters can dwell together in unity. Thank you very much.
I think there is no group that has felt the heat more than the Muslims. And I've witnessed that because since 9/11 until now, I've seen the change and the progress and the openness of the American society. Honestly, we are bombarded every week with groups and people coming from all the horizons and aspects of life, coming to know who we are. And my personal experience is that I went through Europe and I was looked at a terrorist there. I was took by myself out of the airplane, searched in France for hours. Honest to God, I was so glad to get on the American airline. I was very happy because, and you feel it, I did feel it. It's different. Europe, they can claim so much liberty and democracy and all that stuff, but compared to the USA, they are nowhere. The US is still a great country because there is discussion, there is openness. The people are friendly and they're willing to learn about the other person. And that's the great asset of the society. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Wellman and panelists. This was enlightening and encouraging and inspiring.